The dog was about to be abandoned for being too obedient. Although the owner was reluctant to let go of the ball, but still had the heart to throw it out, the dog obediently ran over to get it. But when he got the ball and looked back, he realized that his master had already boarded the plane. Without the slightest reason to abandon their own dog does not know what he did wrong. Helplessly stood in place, eyes pitifully let a person's heart ache. But no one will care about a dog when the ground attendance notification can take off. But surprised to find that a dog actually run to the front of the plane despite the danger. In the end, he came to the starting line ahead of time and used his own flesh and blood to block the plane that was about to take off. The pilot was forced to stop the plane and Palmer took the opportunity to get to the side of the plane, naively thinking that his owner had just forgotten him. But at the sound of the dog's bark, everyone looked out of the window, except his master, who was indifferent, because the most passionate heart can't wake up a person who never loved him. With the pilot pulling the lever, the plane re-entered the runway ready to take off, and this time Palma couldn't catch up no matter what. Selfish human beings willing to enjoy their constant companionship rather than bear the burden of their troubles. It was only when he reached the end of the runway that he reluctantly stopped. Watching the plane disappear from view, Palmer still didn't want to believe he'd been abandoned. So he waited for his master at the airport for 2 years from that day on. It's a true story. Every time a plane landed, he would stand at the top of the stairs hoping to find his master among the people coming down. But this wild dog was disliked by everyone, and some people even stepped on his paws on purpose, for the safety of the passengers. Airport security was dispatched to catch him. The security guards confronted Palmer aggressively, without asking why, and finally put him on the airport bus, promising to take him back to the airport to be disposed of. A young boy who had just gotten off the plane saw this and sneaked onto the bus to save the poor dog. As soon as the door opened, Palmer quickly escaped. It was too late for the security chief to go after him, so he went up to the boy in a rage, wanting to give him a good beating. But then the captain of the plane came over to the boy's father, and the security chief had no choice but to eat his words. But it is easy to see from the back that the relationship between father and son is not harmonious. Late at night, the boy sneaked out. He intended to buy a ticket to leave alone, but because of the age of the ticket agent was too young to be suspected, so he followed a husband and wife to try to pass. But the ticket inspector was still discovered. The boy did not give up. He hid in the landing gear of the airplane, but as soon as he came up, Palmer found him and kept screaming at him, which soon attracted the attention of the airport personnel. The boy had no choice but to jump off the plane and hide with Palmer. The next day, the father received a call from the airport maintenance staff, and when he arrived, he realized that his son had slept with the dog all morning. Without saying a word, he pulled the boy up. But the boy did not want to go back with him because after his parents divorced, he had been living with his mother until recently when she passed away, and he was forced to come to his father's house, which he had not seen a few times, in order to ease the tension between father and son. The maintenance man told the captain to go to work on the pretext that he would miss his flight, and the boy stayed here for the time being under his care. After his father left, the boy complained that if it wasn't for the dog, he would have gotten on the plane. But he said that Palmer had saved your life because when the plane got to 10,000 meters, the cold air around you would have gradually frozen you. The boy then realized that he had blamed the dog and looked at Palmer and felt a warmth in his heart. I did not expect that the next moment Palmer suddenly rushed out of the original. He could tell from the noise of the owner left him on the plane. The boy finally found out what happened from his master's stewardess daughter. It turns out that the day of the boarding of Palmer's owner forgot to bring the vaccination certificate. She had a soft heart and intended to let it go, but unexpectedly the supervisor saw it in the right place. So between his future and his dog, the man finally chose the former and abandoned the dog that had been with him for so many years. After hearing this, the boy's heart was deeply touched, and he felt that he was not another Palmer. He came to the airport and stood quietly in front of Palmer, comforting him gently. Looking at Palmer's longing eyes, the boy said he would help him find his owner. One day Palmer was waiting at the airport as usual, and to his surprise, he spotted the back of his master on this flight. Palmer was excited and rushed towards him, but he was stopped by the security guards, so he had no choice but to run away. He escaped into the airport building. In the crowd, Palmer found a figure that looked like his master. He licked his hand, but he wasn't his master. Looking at the unfamiliar face, Palmer's disappointment was palpable. He hung his head low and froze helplessly in place. Meanwhile, the security guards were approaching him with weapons in their hands. In the nick of time, the boy came forward and yelled at the security guards to keep them away, and with his help, Palmer escaped. He ran wildly and made a mess in the terminal, and finally he and the boy took refuge in a utility room. While they were trying to figure out how to get out, a figure approached them, and it was the fat ant who not only gave Palmer the address of his owner, but also showed the boy the way to escape. Before leaving, Palmer looked back and thanked the fat ant, but not everyone was so kind. The supervisor demanded that the captain take responsibility for the incident or submit his resignation. To save his job, the captain went to the maintenance man's house and brought a team of professional dog catchers. They put a rope around Palmer's head and put him in the car, locking the door and taking him to the slaughterhouse. The boy begged and pleaded so loudly that his tears ran dry, but his father didn't do anything until the car was gone and he let him go. He stumbled after Palmer, but all that was left behind was a cloud of dust. Adults can do anything for their future. If he had been in trouble this time, he would have been the same as Parma. He hated his father. Even the mechanic's daughter couldn't stand it anymore. So she slipped an envelope addressed to Parma's owner into the captain's hand. When he got home, the boy began to pack his bags. He preferred to go to an orphanage rather than live at home. Adults think that money can make up for the lack of affection, but they don't realize that what children need most is companionship. The father promised the boy that he would send him to an orphanage, but he had to stay at home tonight to prevent his son from running away in the middle of the night. The father came to the car to keep an eye on him. Then he remembered the letter his son had written to the owner of Parma, and after reading it, he realized what had happened. The captain was also touched by this scene, so he asked his journalist friend to help Palmer to report this story. But the boss of the company saw it first, and sensing a huge business opportunity, he hired a group of journalists to publicize the story. Ironically, the boss was only using Palmer for a show. Even the photos were taken with a borrowed camera. Luckily, thanks to his publicity, more and more people learnt about Palmer's case, some of whom flew all the way to the airport to meet Palmer. The boy's relationship with his father was eased, and the captain's father even found his mate in Parma's presence. Everything seemed to be going well, but Palmer still hadn't waited for his master, until the day he was waiting for his master. As usual, when a Dalmatian came to greet him, but they hadn't played for long before the owner called him away. As he watched him being put into a cage and taken on the plane, Palmer finally realized that dogs were allowed on planes and that he had been abandoned. He left that night with his head hanging like a lost soul. Since then, he'd stopped waiting for planes at the airport and spent the rest of his days at the maintenance man's house. But the airlines weren't happy about losing their cash cow. They built him a kennel on the tarmac and took Palmer by force, but he had no motivation to live. He wouldn't even eat the food he was given. The boy was so distressed that he called a vet, who didn't find anything wrong with him but said that the dog wouldn't live much longer because his heart was already dead. After everyone left, Palmer heard his master's voice in a daze. His eyes widened in disbelief as he realized that he was standing outside his cage. Parma regained his usual vigor and excitedly walked towards his master, but there was no one outside. So it turns out that when you miss something so much, you can really have hallucinations. This was the last straw that broke the camel's back, and he lost all faith. At night there was a torrential downpour, but Parma didn't budge, letting the freezing rain slap him in the face. Fearing for Parma's safety, the boy ran through the rain. Seeing Palmer lying motionless on the ground, he moved his head over to him and soothed him gently, telling him to pull himself together. The airport, in the presence of the press, they finally waited for the IL-18, and the unforgiving hatch was opened, and Palmer recognized his owner at once. But the man's face was full of astonishment, as if he couldn't believe that Parma had waited for him for 2 years. And then he was so touched by the dog's loyalty to him that he wanted to come up and recognize him. But as he came down, he became apprehensive, ashamed of having abandoned him. There were so many emotions in the man's eyes on this short journey, but Palmer couldn't catch the love. As his master beckoned to him, Parma took a couple of steps back, but by instinct, he finally stepped forward and kept his eyes on the boy. The master forced Parma's head back. The boy knew he had to let go, so he walked towards the man and reluctantly handed him the leash, then walked away, holding back his tears. Unbeknownst to him, Palmer's eyes were following him the moment he turned around, looking at his son's feigned strength. The father witnessed all this and felt very bad about it. Then he called the man alone and said he wanted to buy Parma, no matter how much he wanted to pay. Even the keys to his favorite car were exchanged. But the man refused to sell, not because he had a clear conscience, but because the company was under pressure from the public, and his bosses were constantly pressuring him to bring Parma back if he wanted to keep his job. It turns out that love can be disguised. Thus, under the cameras of many reporters, the man took Parma on the plane, but when he reached the boy, Parma refused to leave. The man pulled on the rope with great force, and in his eyes, Parma clearly saw dislike and impatience. Disappointed, Parma took 2 steps back and realized that the boy was the one who really loved her. Palmer struggled to get back to his master, and everyone around him was shocked by the reversal of the situation. At last, he broke away from his master and rushed towards the boy without thinking. But the next moment the rope was stomped on by the security guards who cruelly kept the boy away from Palmer. Understanding Palmer's true intentions, the boy could not remain calm and even called out for the first time during his struggle. The father in the cockpit decided to do the same for his son and switched off the plane's instruments. The superintendent soon came to him and threatened to fire him for starting the plane. When the father didn't budge, the superintendent was ready to ask the co-pilot to take his place, but the co-pilot refused to carry out her orders too. Rules can take a back seat to emotions, and the captain apologized to his colleagues before being removed from his position. The colleague was also touched by what he had done, and she went to the man with tears in her eyes and said that the dog could not get on the plane without a vaccination certificate. The boss learned of the situation and angrily rushed to order them to take off immediately, but the stewardess still insisted that no vaccination certificate is not allowed. More and more co-workers sided with them, and eventually even the supervisor was touched. At this moment, Palmer also looked at the man with a pleading look in his eyes. The man knew that the last thing he could do was to let the dog go, and that he was no longer worthy of being his master. So he took Parma's leash off. With that, Parma rushed off the plane with his tail wagging towards the boy with his eyes full of him. Parma!
在我的身边，我以为忘了想念。